And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. I delivered this statement on behalf of Dr. Fayssal Mikdad, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates in the Syrian Arab Republic. Mr. President, I would like to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela, Mr. Ivan Hill, for the efforts made by his country as coordinator of the Group of Friends for the Defense of the UN Charter to convene this meeting to discuss an extremely important humanitarian issue affecting many countries, which is the UCMs as a means of economic coercion and pressure and political blackmail. We associate ourselves with the statement delivered by the representative of Uganda on behalf of the G77 and China and the NAM, and the statement delivered by Venezuela on behalf of the Group of Friends for the Defense of the Charter. Mr. President, the UN Charter reaffirmed the principle of sovereign equality among member states. It adopted international cooperation and the promotion of social and economic development of peoples among its purposes. With a view to develop friendly relations among states and promote international cooperation based on justice and equity, the General Assembly adopted in 1970 Resolution 2625, which included the Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states. The declaration stipulates, I quote, "No state may use or encourage the use of economic, political, or any other type of measures to coerce another state in order to obtain from it the subordination of the exercise of its sovereign rights or to secure from it advantages of any kinds." End of quotation. The General Assembly reaffirmed this position in 1974 in paragraph 32 of Resolution 3281, which included the Charter of Economic Rights and Duties of States. Instead of engaging in constructive cooperation, the United States and its allies chose to renounce diplomatic work and political dialogue and to adopt policies of hegemony, blockades, coercion, and UCMs. They have adopted irrational classifications like the so-called US list of states sponsors of terrorism, in order to target specific member states and to justify interfering in their internal affairs in an attempt to undermine their sovereignty and their national choices. In recent years, the pace of UCMs has increased, those UCMs imposed by the United States and the European Union. The scope of these illegal measures was expanded in their different forms and appellations. This has caused economic hardships for our countries and immense humanitarian suffering. It deprived several peoples of the world from enjoying their most fundamental rights, including the right to a dignified life, to health, to food, and to development. It subjected them to collective punishment, which represents a violation of the UN Charter, which entrusted the Security Council exclusively with imposing sanctions according to criteria set in Chapter 7 of the Charter. The United Nations has condemned the imposition of UCMs, considering them blatant violations of provisions of international law and of the principles and purposes of the Charter, and an obstacle preventing the enjoyment of human rights. Relevant GA resolutions considered these UCMs or considered that these UCMs directly and seriously affect all aspects of life in targeted countries. However, the successive US administrations and the European Union chose to continue with their UCMs, ignoring the resolutions of our organization and its principles, invoking the so-called rules-based order, and we do not know what those rules are, in an attempt by these countries to consolidate this rules-based order to replace the UN Charter. Mr. President, my country, Syria, has been suffering for more than 4 decades. It is suffering as a result of the illegitimate, immoral, inhumane measures imposed by successive US administrations and by its allies in the European Union and other countries. They have imposed successive UCM packages at a growing frequency during the war of terror waged by these same states against my country, Syria, to stifle the Syrians and to punish them for supporting their leadership and for sticking to their national choices and positions. The devastating consequences of these UCMs have affected all aspects of the daily life of Syrians. They have affected all sectors, including public health, the provision of vaccines and life-saving medicine, hospital equipment, water sector, irrigation, the banking sector, commercial transactions, financial transfers, transportation sector, civil aviation equipment and spare parts, as well as the energy sector, including the exportation of oil and oil derivatives and the importing of necessary spare parts to provide electricity, which is a lifeline for Syrians and for our national economy. In addition, the agricultural sector was affected by these UCMs, which prevented us from importing fertilizers, seeds, and machinery necessary for agricultural production, which is the main pillar of the Syrian economy and which is paramount to improve the living conditions and to reduce food insecurity in Syria. These illegitimate measures also prevent the dignified return of the displaced and refugees to their regions. The US administration did not stop at that. It is seeking to increase its sanctions through what is being falsely called laws, like the Caesar Act, the Captagon Law, and other tools of political and economic pressure and blackmail, which are targeting anyone trying to support Syria and its people. The Special UN Rapporteur on the impact of UCMs on the enjoyment of human rights, Ms. Elena Dohan, following her visit to Syria in 2022, emphasized the devastating and serious consequences of UCMs on the enjoyment by the Syrians of their fundamental rights. She stated that these illegitimate UCMs have greatly affected all forms of life and have greatly affected the national economy and recovery and reconstruction efforts. The consequences of these UCMs are being compounded by the hostile conduct of the United States and its allies against Syria, including the acts of aggression, occupation, the plundering of the Syrian national resources, and depriving Syrians from enjoying their national resources. Mr. President, my country, Syria, reaffirms that UCMs represent economic terrorism. They are a sword hanging over the necks of people's financial institutions, commercial and business sectors in third countries, which are refraining from any transactions with the targeting states in order to avoid being targeted themselves by these unjust sanctions. Experience has shown the falsehood of what being said about the humanitarian carve-outs. We have witnessed this firsthand during COVID-19 and in the aftermath of the devastating earthquake last year. The countries that consider these measures as tools to serve their foreign policy have been promoting baseless justifications for their criminal conduct. But these justifications will not change the fact that these measures run counter to the UN Charter and to the principles and rules of international law and international customary law. They are internationally prohibited acts that entail responsibility for the countries imposing them. The Syrian Arab Republic calls upon all member states to promote and unite their efforts to counter the UCMs and the policies of starvation and blockade. We call for an immediate, full and unconditional lifting of all forms of UCMs that are being imposed by Western states on Cuba, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Belarus, Nicaragua, the DPRK, Zimbabwe, Eritrea, Mali, and against my country, Syria, and other countries. Syria reaffirms the need to put an end to all attempts to interfere in the internal affairs of these states and to respect their sovereignty that was guaranteed by the Charter and by international law. The United Nations bears an established and urgent responsibility. It should push forward serious multilateral work to address this issue, and it should adopt all the necessary measures and means to prevent the use of these UCMs and to compensate for their negative consequences. Therefore, Syria calls for convening more frequent General Assembly sessions around this item to address this issue effectively and to listen to briefings and reports from the Secretariat on the efforts that are being made to end this blatant violation of international law and of the UN Charter. We look forward to the special report that the Secretary General will submit on the impact of inhumane UCMs imposed on the Syrian people and on the work of the UN and other humanitarian organizations in my country, Syria. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic